Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Happy Wednesday, everybody. The situation in Shanghai is looking more concerning by the day. China's financial megacity now has seen hundreds of cases, including the highly transmissible BA5, across all of its 16 districts in the last several days. More than 200 buildings have been placed under lockdown across the city, and local media reports that the city is reopening some centralized quarantine facilities, and neighborhood committees in at least 3 districts have advised locals to stock up on at least 2 weeks of food and supplies. According to outlet Caixin, there are several outbreak sources for the BA5 cases being discovered in Shanghai, all from people who have travelled from outside of China back into the country. We remember recently the government reduced the number of days incoming travellers need to be in centralised quarantine to 7 days. Well, it appears that the first case of BA5 in Shanghai was from someone who travelled from North America on June 23rd, but only tested positive on July 6th, almost 2 weeks after they arrived, and well after the end of quarantine. If this is the case, and if more cases like this are discovered, we may well see the government reset the quarantine rules for incoming persons back to at least 2 weeks. And it was only yesterday too that the Civil Aviation Administration of China announced plans to allow airlines to gradually increase international flights. This may end up being put on hold if, as I said, the situation in Shanghai worsens. In the first half of this year, airline passenger traffic fell 52% compared with a year earlier. In April, fewer than 3,000 flights operated daily, 17.5% of the level in 2019, according to data from the Civil Aviation Administration of China. Of course, it is not just Shanghai that is seeing lockdowns and restrictions, though, as we have seen, a lockdown of Shanghai causes the most devastation to the national economy, which is why we are following it so closely. The social issue of stigmatization towards residents who have recovered from COVID is growing too, and is indeed now becoming a public policy concern. Just yesterday, a theatre in South China's Guangdong province was forced to apologize and reverse a policy prohibiting the entry of visitors who were once infected with COVID-19, even if the infection was well over a year ago, after a public backlash. Shanghai's government has also had to expressly tell employers not to reject job applicants who have recovered from COVID. Next up, a massive heat wave hits China. If you guys are enjoying the video or appreciate what I'm trying to do here, don't forget to hit the like button. And for anyone who wants to go the extra mile and help keep China Update sustainable, it's just me making these episodes every day. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. I really want the channel to be subscriber supported and not have to rely on corporate sponsorship. As always, thank you so much everybody for the ongoing support. A powerful heat wave is joining large floods as natural disasters sweep across southern China, threatening rice farming and other critical agriculture for this year's harvest and putting strain on power grids. If it didn't have enough problems already, today, Wednesday, Shanghai issued a red alert, the highest level of heat warning, as the temperature reached 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees Fahrenheit. And oh boy, you could certainly feel it. According to the Shanghai Meteorological Service, the city has only experienced 15 days with temperatures above 40 degrees since the city began keeping records in 1873. And it's not just Shanghai feeling the heat. As of filming, a total of 84 cities across the country issued their highest level red alert warnings today. Cities in Sichuan, Jiangsu and Zhejiang have all been affected. In the city of Chongqing, the roof of a museum melted, with traditional Chinese tiles popping as the underlying tar dissolved. According to the National Meteorological Center, the national heat wave is expected to last through this weekend at the earliest, with temperatures reaching as high as 42 degrees Celsius. This heat wave is coming at an inconvenient time for China. We remember last month parts of southern China were hit by the heaviest downpours in 60 years, directly impacting 500,000 people. It's also a critical time for China's early rice to meet the harvest, with the heat hurting rice yields. The State Council has repeatedly warned of food security concerns this year, stressing that the harvest must be met. Electricity use has also hit records across several Chinese provinces as people increase their AC usage, putting further strain on local power grids and risking depleting stockpiles of coal, which is primarily used for electricity generation in the country. Last up, the Chinese economy, and let's talk credit and debt. New bank lending in China surged in June, rising more than expected by economists surveyed by both Reuters and Bloomberg, as the People's Bank of China, China's central bank, increased efforts to stabilize the pandemic-hit economy. According to central bank data published on Monday, Chinese banks extended 2.81 trillion RMB, just shy of $420 billion in new RMB loans in June, an increase over the month before. Corporate financing demand improved due in large part to government policies to boost infrastructure investment. This comes as no surprise, of course. Home prices have also increased as nervous regulators try to arrest the collapse in housing sales we have seen this year. More on the housing sector in tomorrow's episode. Of course, as we have been anticipating for months now, credit and thus debt within the wider system is surging. So far this year, total debt has increased by an incredible 20 trillion RMB. That is roughly 34% of expected GDP over this period, assuming there is not another major lockdown going forward, which is a large assumption at this point. Analysts are now forecasting that China's official debt to GDP ratio will likely swell from 274% last year to just shy of 290% this year. These are official numbers, and of course some speculate that the real debt to GDP ratio could be much higher. Across China, the growing financial burden on local governments is a story we have been following very closely for months now. This swelling burden is pushing many to gamble with dangerous debt products aimed at retail investors. This, in turn, has led to renewed concerns about financial risk in a system already suffering from no lack of financial risk in other areas. Now, we often quote China financial expert Michael Pettis on China Update. He has a real knack for communicating complex systemic issues in a highly condensed and accessible manner. Professor Pettis spoke on this issue of financial risk yesterday, and it's worth once again examining his observations. As bad debt and overly risky borrowing structures become bigger and bigger problems, they will increasingly be blamed on fraudulent or criminal behavior by unscrupulous individuals. But that's the wrong way to look at it. This is a systemic problem. Local governments have seen revenues collapse and expenses rise, and are also tasked with creating enough economic activity to meet growth targets well above what the economy can sustainably deliver. Professor Pettis continues by explaining that the only way they can manage these conflicting conditions and policies is by allowing debt to surge. If there were still enough productive investment projects, he argues, into which they could invest to meet growth targets, this wouldn't be a problem. That's because by definition the growth in debt would be more than matched by the growth in GDP, and debt servicing wouldn't be a problem. But it's been over 10 years that this hasn't been the case, which is why the country's debt burden has soared in the past decade. Local governments, in other words, are caught in an impossible situation. Beijing insists on both unrealistically high growth targets and debt moderation. Because they can't achieve both, local governments will be forced to drop one or the other of these two objectives. What's most likely is that they will drop the latter, getting around debt constraints in any way they can in order to meet the unrealistic growth targets. In that case, unconventional borrowing through risky debt products is inevitable. The problem, as anyone with emerging markets debt experience can tell you, is that these risky debt products create highly inverted balance sheets that only exacerbate external conditions. Making things better today means making them worse tomorrow. He concludes with, quote, "Among other things, this means that we will get a temporary pop in the next year or two as COVID restrictions are removed. Things will look better than they really are, but only for a short while, before systemic pro-secularity kicks in, harder than ever." End quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody. I'll see you tomorrow.